Hello and welcome to the MindGym webinar on management development. My name's Octavius Black, I'm the CEO of MindGym, and I'm delighted to share with you our research and latest findings on why the manager is back, only this time it's personal. My story starts a few years ago when I was lucky enough to meet with the global head of what is probably the most highly respected management consultancy in the world. I asked the gentleman in question his advice, and he was tremendously humble, as many great men and women are, suggesting that he really didn't have much that he could offer. But he did offer this. He said, I have worked through 3 recessions, and in each case, there's a different reason why some companies fast-track out to recovery ahead of their competitors. Looking back, he said, to the recession of the 1980-81, the oil crisis, he said it was those that focused on strategy, those that did their analysis in order to understand where to focus their investment and their resources. They were the ones that came out fastest. He said moving on to 91, it was technology, those who used IT to increase the speed of supply chains, understand their customers better, improve quality and take out costs. They were the ones that came out fastest. He said this time, it is about talent. It is those organizations that understand their people and how to help and equip them so that they flourish. They're the ones who are getting there first. So, what is it that keeps people and helps people flourish? What we do know is that managers matter enormously. When it comes to why people stay, my boss is the 3rd most important reason. When it comes to improving my performance, my boss is the 2nd most important. And then when it comes to why I leave, the first reason why people go is because they don't like their manager. So not only do we know that people rate their managers as a very influential part of their work, but far more extensive research has been done on the commercial impact that a good manager has versus a poor one. The first study I want to take us to is one designed by and conducted by Stanford. What they looked at were people in largely clerical roles, maybe checkout staff or airline check-ins or working a concession in a movie theatre. The number of people involved in this study was 23,878. The number of managers they assessed as part of this study was therefore 1,946. The study took place over 5 years, from the beginning of 2006 to the end of 2010, and during that period, they collected 6 million data points on performance. On average, the checkout or other clerical staff had 4 managers during a year. So it was actually much more straightforward to see what the difference was in terms of performance of the better managers versus the worst. And what they found was this, that by swapping a poor manager for a good one, the output of the team increased by 12%. This compares with adding an additional member to the team by keeping the same manager, which increased output by only 11%. Furthermore, the new team member cost, if you like, in the region of $25,000, whereas the cost of a better manager was, well, nothing. So this started to give a very strong commercial and business case for why we should focus on managers for people doing largely clerical, with a bit of IT element type of work. The riposte is, well, that's fine for that kind of job, but what about for those who work in more thinky types of roles, where there's more ambiguity and more need for judgment and decisions? Really, does the quality of the manager matter so much there? And how would you know? Well, we moved from Stanford to Wharton. Here they looked at one industry which tracks revenue for every single new launch, and furthermore, on those new launches has the names of the managers involved. It's an industry that borrows lots of its nomenclature from Hollywood and is bigger than the film industry, and it is the electronic games world. And on the back of every single electronic game, should you wish to turn it over and look in the credits, you'll see the name of 2 roles, the director and the producer. The director is, if you like, the creative person. They're the person who comes up with the concepts and the ideas and what happens when you move from one level to the other and when the aliens start eating your swords. The producer is, if you like, the project manager, the person who makes it all happen. So what the Wharton study did was it looked at over 900 video games and compared the difference of having a strong director with a weak one and a strong producer with a weaker one. And what they found was this, that, as one might imagine, the creative does have an impact on the performance and future revenue of the electronic video game. The impact is 7%. The producer, in effect project manager, one might imagine would have less impact, but in fact it's far more. The impact of the producer was 23%. Thereby, the combined effect of having good managers versus poor ones was a 30% increase in forward revenue. And these are two fascinating studies, one across industries and one within industries. But neither of these address what's happened in the same company. So the riposte might be within our organization, changing the manager doesn't make an enormous difference. But we work with Mitchells and Butlers, a restaurant pub chain in the United Kingdom, and they've found that the quality of a manager, as described by the upward feedback in the employee survey, is an accurate lead indicator of the quality of food served in a pub, the average expenditure by a customer, customer service, and indeed pub or restaurant outlet profitability. Let me give you another example, where it's even more straightforward to compare like for like. It's a supermarket chain in Holland. And here they have 50 supermarkets, and they analyze the type of leadership of each of those supermarkets in three ways. One was what they called structured leadership, organized, focused, allocating work efficiently, good at the process, good at managing the rotas. The second was considerate. This was about caring for people, looking after them, showing the pastoral responsibilities. And then there was a third type they called transformational or inspirational. And this was combined both the structured and the considerate, but also did an awful lot to create a sense of vision and emotional connection with the employees there. Now what they found was considerate and inspirational didn't make an awful lot of difference on the broad organizational factors, those things that could be measured, for example, by asking people. But when it came to the commercial measures, the actual business metrics on which these supermarkets' business was assessed, they found there was a significant difference. The inspirational leaders have far exceeded the other two in terms of net profit, and were also ahead in terms of controlled costs. So what we start to see is an increasing body of research that shows that good managers lead to significant improvements in bottom line performance versus their average or more poorer brethren. The next question is, well, if that's the case, why don't we do more to have good managers? And I think that starts with how we look at managers in society. Depending a bit on what your age is, you may take your cue from 9 to 5, or maybe it's The Devil Wears Prada, more recently The Internship, or, for many of us, The Office. In each of these cases, the manager is painted as the bad guy. In fact, when Hollywood decided to make a film about bosses, they didn't call them the happy bosses or the helpful bosses or even the hassle bosses. No, they went for horrible bosses. No room for ambiguity and no shortage of celebrity stars who wanted to sign up to reinforce this image. Now, it might be bad enough to be lambasted from the outside world if at least within organizations the managers were heralded as the great heroes and heroines that they are, the keys to organizational turnaround. But sadly, that isn't the case either. What tends to go wrong is that in most organizations, management doesn't really matter. If there's glamour, it's in leadership. In fact, over 10 times as much is spent per head on developing our leaders as is in our managers. In many cases, far more even than that. That when we choose about who we promote, it's much more about individual contribution than management capability. And that people who are very good at managing but aren't necessarily technical experts often suffer as a result. Then when someone is made a manager, it's as well, not instead. So on top of their individual targets, they're also expected to manage a team. And funnily enough, this gets put off and sidelined and not given the priority that we can see from the earlier data it most certainly should deserve. Then there's a question of what makes a good manager? What are you supposed to do? We work with one client that has 72 competencies for a manager. It would be impossible even to remember them all, let alone actually deliver on them. So what we find is that the manager looks at what their task is supposed to be and what's expected of them, sees the impossible, and kind of gives up. When we do management development, it tends to be too little too late. I get appointed as a manager, but I may not get training for another year until the course comes up, or I'm eligible for it, or I'm seen as a suitable high flyer. What I need to know is now, how do I make the transition from buddy to boss? Now, how do I structure my team meetings and my governance so that I get most out of my people? Not in a year's time when the things are already set up and the relationships are pretty much formed. And then there's the scourge of the 360 review. Now, 360 can be tremendously helpful. There is no doubt that it is useful to know what members of their team think of them as managers. But the risk becomes that that is the only thing that matters, that the quality of the manager is determined simply by the collective views of the people who work for them, and tend to be the views that are the most recent at the time of the survey. People tend to record their views based on the last 4 to 6 weeks. So what happens is that being good means being popular. Now that's a very dangerous place for a manager to go, because it starts to lead to declines in performance in order to make people feel nice or feel good in the moment. And then there's the final piece. Who manages the managers? It tends to be that managers and managers care about targets and outputs and structure and process, just as they did when they were straightforward managers. But actually what they should be doing is looking far more about how they coach and enable their managers to become better at looking after people themselves. So these are some of the reasons why things tend to go wrong in the area of developing managers. But then the next question is, what does a good manager look like, and how can we define it in ways to make sure it goes right? Well, there's the old view of the manager, the company man, the person who organized rotas, tasks, checked on quality, reported data. The ideal qualification of this was in many ways the MBA. It was a way of accelerating apprenticeships so that people could be highly skilled as business people faster than having to work their full tour of duty. Henry Mintzberg, great management guru, talks about the MBA being almost the worst qualification for being a manager of a business. He says they make great analysts, great consultants, great bankers, but actually what matters in being a manager is all about being human, and an MBA doesn't teach you that. Indeed, he suggested that what the new manager needs far more than the MBA is a psychology degree. Well, as mind, Jim, where we find science is sexy and psychology is our science, we wouldn't disagree. But what we have done is not taken our own view, but looked at the great mass of data. There are over 168 different validated competencies for managers, and there's plenty of data that sits behind them. Luckily, there have been several rather significant meta-analyses. Now, a meta-analysis is when you gather all the data together and you see what correlations occur. And a number of people have done this, and we have indeed pulled together the meta-analyses and done a meta-analysis of them. We then took that data and tested it with 30 leading organizations with whom we work. And as a result, we have developed the 7 key talents that mark out successful managers from the rest. This is a model which is now used in a number of major organizations, including, for example, Unilever, who have it as the core basis for all their management development worldwide. So let me share with you briefly what those 7 talents are and how they connect one with the other. Now, of the 7 talents, 1 counts more than all the rest. The primus inter pares, if you use the phrase that British Prime Ministers have to describe their role in cabinet, the first among equals. And this is relate, the ability to create relationships, to form them with people whom we need to work with, to nurture them, and so that they continue to grow and to strengthen, to repair them when they're damaged, and on occasion to exit, to know which people it is not good to be with, and therefore to remove ourselves from their orbit. Now, there are many relationships we need to form, but perhaps the key to all of them is a relationship a manager has with the person it is that they manage. This scientists call the LMX, the leader-manager exchange. And what we know from the research is that the stronger the leader-manager exchange is, the more impact all the other talents will have. So, for example, where there is a strong relationship and a manager gives, if you like, supportive feedback, tells someone something they could be doing better, then when the relationship is strong, the individual is very likely to adopt it. They think, oh, they're trying to help me out, they're giving me some good advice. But when the relationship is weak, even though the feedback is exactly the same, word for word, it is not adopted and not followed. Or they're just trying to find an excuse, or they always had it in for me. And therefore, the same content, the same techniques, the same tools are greatly diluted or greatly expanded depending on a manager's ability to form and build strong relationships. So if relate lies at the core, it's worth looking at what sits around the sides, but bearing in mind that without this, each of the others is going to be diluted as a consequence. The next talent to look at is coach. In the Stanford study that I mentioned earlier about the clerical staff and check-in staff and what impact having a good manager versus a poor one had, the number one factor that most differentiated the good from the poor was the ability to coach, that people were learning from them and getting better as a result. This helps people's individuals, but it's also about how getting the team to work together, to craft roles so that each is supporting the other. Mind you, we have worked extensively with our academic board to develop a new type of coaching called commercial coaching. The reason for that is many people have come to us to say that the old style of coaching of asking questions and hoping that the individual would come with the answer was unpredictable and didn't always deliver results. We then went back into a number of different areas of science, including swift therapy, and looked at what it was that you could do to help change behavior quickly. And from that, we've developed a model called commercial coaching. We recently ran it in a series of outlets for a mobile phone operator of stores. And we found that where commercial coaching was adopted, sales were 29% higher against target than in those where it had not been. The essence of commercial coaching is that the manager is the expert or an expert and is therefore happy to impart and share their views, listens and debates, but doesn't take everything the individual says about their performance at face value, comes on with facts about the past, but spends the vast majority of the conversation focusing on the future. What would it look like if this was being really well done? So talent number 2, coach. Talent number 3 is innovate. Now the challenge with so much of management is not that you have to do it yourself, but you're there to encourage others to do it. The purpose of Innovate is to help stimulate people's thoughts and ideas across the team and find ways to harness them. This means the idea may not look very well formed, but it's nurtured and developed. What you like about this idea is X, and could we possibly add Y? Or let's leave it for a while and we'll come back to it and look at it in due course. But helping people take their ideas and navigate them through the organization or across the team so that they can be delivered. We ran a major innovation program across the back office of a well-known global bank, and they found many hundreds of millions of savings by getting the ideas of people who would look at, for example, batch processing and had a way of doing it that would save an hour off each batch process, which in turn, across the whole organization, delivered enormous benefits. So it's the role of the manager to encourage those new ideas to come up and to find ways of turning them into reality. And it's that turning into reality that takes us to the next of the 7 talents, which is execute. In a period of a month, I had meetings with 2 very impressive and very important, significant senior business leaders. One was Paul Walsh, who was at the time the CEO of Diageo, one of the fastest growing and the largest drinks group in the world. And the other, and I met with him in London, and the other was Louis Miranda, who I met in Mumbai. He has built more power stations in India than the Indian government. And I asked them each quite separately, what was the one talent, the one skill that you most look for in a manager? And they said it was the ability to execute, to make things happen. The challenge here is to get the dial right, between taking sufficient charge so that things happen, but not so much that you end up either doing your people's work for them or micromanaging. Equally, you don't want to be the absentee landlord who has delegated so much that when you come back it wasn't quite right the way you wanted it or wasn't done on time or to quality. So understanding when and how to delegate, when and how to check, when and how to be present and when and how to be absent lies at the core of this particular of the 7 talents, the ability to execute. Execute is important, but so is energy. And this is one of the findings that came from a Gallup survey, which looked at 116 leadership development programs. What they wanted to find out was what was the aspect in leadership development programs that had most lasting impact on performance. And what they found was it was the ability to give hope. That equipping leaders to go back to their teams and give people the sense of belief that there was something that was worth going for and that was worth pursuing, and that the leader was committed to getting there, was the single factor which had most impact off the back of the leadership development programs. Now, sometimes this is just about being energetic in the moment, making the effort to ask people how their weekends are, and not just saying, yes, fine, when someone asks you how yours was. But there's more to this than that. It's also about giving a sense of purpose for your team. I was in a conversation with someone who was responsible for the personal care products in Pakistan. These are beauty products for a big company. And what she said was, well, I said, what's your purpose for your team? She said, well, it's to set these growth targets and these margins and market penetrations. So that's very laudable. But why is it you do what you do? Well, what benefit do customers have from it? Well, it kind of makes them look nice, she said. But to be honest, I feel a bit guilty. I mean, Pakistan is a really tough country. And you can go out and during the day there could be bombs going off. There could be a whole range of dangers in there. And we're dealing with the trivia that's makeup and other cosmetics. So how can I turn that into a purpose worth having? So we went back to why people buy makeup in Pakistan. Now, the interesting thing is that I didn't know is that Pakistanis take a lot about interest in their personal care, and that actually it's quite a tough society, in particular for women. And therefore, what happens is that women use their makeup as a way of making themselves feel better, of bringing cheer into their life, and of doing something that's really important to their identity, which is about how they present themselves. And therefore, actually, what this woman is doing and her team is bringing moments of delight and new confidence to people who don't get very much of either. And so when we started to talk about it in that terms, she could see how there was a passion and a purpose that would energize her team to get excited. There are two psychologists called Averlio and Luthans who talk a lot about hope. And they actually divide it into two things. They divide it into willpower, which is where energize comes, but they also divide it into way power. Way power is about where we're going and at least some of the steps on which we think we should take in order to get there. Now, the sixth talent, direct, is all about the way power. Where is it we are heading? How will we know if we are successful? And what are the steps on the way, the mini milestones that we can celebrate in order to get there? And therefore, combining this with the energize starts to provide the momentum and the support and the focus so that when a manager isn't there, the right decisions are still being taken, the right judgment calls are being made. Because the key about management is not what happens when you're in the room, but when you're out the room. And if people have clear direction, they're far more likely to follow the right ways when you're outside the room. So these are six of the talents about effective managers, about how we, in effect, connect with other people. But the seventh one isn't about other people. It's about ourselves. And in these exhausting, demanding, challenging times and these very busy organizations in which we work, the one thing we do also need to do is to look after ourselves. Because if we aren't strong, and if we aren't healthy, and if we aren't present, all the other talents will be muted, and our efforts to deliver results will be diluted. And so a key part of the 7 talents is how I care for my own well-being. Maybe about getting enough sleep or taking enough exercise. It may be about just checking in on myself from time to time or working out how I want my life to be and therefore adapting and organizing it and shaping it around that. So in this sense, we present and share with you the 7 core talents. There's more detail behind each of them, as you can well imagine. So this is what great managers do and are like. How do we get them there? Well, one thing we think is probably not the right way to go is the one-off program. As I mentioned earlier, that tends to happen either too late or once it's happened, it gets forgotten. And the research that we have shared in other webinars shows that when you distribute learning, when you take the same learning and have a little or often, you increase the transfer rate, the level of impact, by half a standard deviation. So our model works as follows. That we start off by engaging people, to get them excited. Why does this stuff matter to me, not to the company? But how am I going to be better off? Why should I bother doing this? And then to participate, to take part in some kind of experience that helps me discover practical tools and techniques that I can use and apply. And then to activate, to try them out, to see what happens. And then come back, re-engage and see, well, what happened when I gave it a go? Did it work or not? Did I get a better result or am I worse off? And if I didn't get a good result, how could I learn from others who tried something similar and did get a good result? You know, I gave the praise and the person just walked off and seemed to ignore it. Well, it's almost like they gave the praise and the person walked off and seemed to ignore it, but later they heard them repeating it to somebody else. And someone else saw them repeating the same activity. And therefore we start to learn from our peers, from other managers, and we build this support group so that we continue to get engaged, to try things out, to learn from each other about what happens as a result. I'll share with you one example open program that MindGym runs in London called the Management Masterclass. I share it because it's a structure that many organizations are using internally and finding it's delivering far greater results than their more traditional learning solutions. It starts with a diagnostic, in this case a 360 diagnostic. And by 360 we don't just mean what your direct reports think of you, but also your peers and your manager. It's a diagnostic we've developed against the 7 talents, and it's freely available online for you to complete if you should so wish. Then what we do is build from that into a series of what we call workouts, in effect bite-sized sessions. You can't run the engage, participate, activate model frequently and often if you have to go away for a day or 2 days each time. If you're only going away for 90 minutes or a couple of hours, it's no longer than a normal meeting. And therefore, rather than taking time away from work, it's usually magic time that we can find elsewhere. You wouldn't take time off work because you had to go to a meeting, for example, so why would you for a 2-hour training course? Then critically, at the end of that, we ask people to think about a mission. What is the way in which I'm going to try and apply 1 or 2 of the tools that I've learned in reality when I go, if you like, back to work? They then have a go at the mission and then come back a period of time later, a week, 2 weeks later, to do what's called a booster. That's when the group discusses what happened, what did I try, what worked, and what didn't. Then they learn something new, then they have another mission, and so on and so forth. And to make it come to life in terms of the 7 talents, then you would bring in, for example, great feedback as part of Coach and your impact on others as part of Relate, and so on and so forth through the journey. But this is a whistle-stop tour, and thank you for your time and patience for listening to all of this. I can direct you, for those of you who would like to know more, to the MindGym website, where there is not only this recording, which is probably where you found it, but also the questionnaire that you can fill in and directions about where to go to find out more, and download the white paper, which will tell you far more about what sits under each of the talents and the sources of data you can go to if you want to find out greater things. But for now, that's all from me, Octavius at the MindGym. Thank you very much for listening this far. I hope this has been useful, and look forward to continuing the discussion with you at some stage in the future. With best wishes. Goodbye.